just when it seemed like we had finally made some positive progress in our investigation, what with learning that, indeed, it seems like Emma is still alive, things have instead taken an unexpectedly tragic turn, what with our next major lead in the case, Dennis Aston, turning up dead. And I will give Sheriff Morgan some credit. He is pretty prompt on the crime scene, trying to follow up on any leads with Dennis Aston's properties, especially the nearby Aston Farm warehouse. But I also want to say that there's a number of things he could possibly improve on. Namely, he could probably set up a perimeter, make this an active crime scene, maybe get the active mob of protesters away from Dennis Aston's house. And even more than that, I mean, this has been labeled as a suicide, but the evidence that I think Sheriff Morgan presents here as it being a suicide is a little bit tenuous. I mean, anybody could have written a suicide note, and anybody could have placed a gun in Dennis Aston's hand. And as far as I can tell, there's not any, I guess, forensic team in town to do a thorough investigation, so I guess they're just going to have to go along with that. More importantly, though, in Dennis's suicide note, he does admit to being the drug kingpin in town, supplying the hallucinogenic epoch to everyone. And I guess after the little discussion that he and Sheriff Morgan had this morning about the massive stash of drugs found, it did spook him, and I guess led him to commit suicide. Matthew, for his part, really doesn't care. He just wants to learn any new information about Emma, and sadly, there was no real mention of that in Dennis's note. And while it is probably a good idea to follow up on any more of Aston's properties in town to maybe see if Emma might be there, for all we know, she is stuck in one of the rooms in the ruined apartment building. It's still, I don't know, it still doesn't seem like Dennis was the one behind it all. I mean, while he could have easily been controlling the drug trade in town, and, you know, a number of his properties were directly in correlation with a number of illegal activities going on, I don't know, he just didn't really strike me as the criminal mastermind type. Still, if anything, more and more items are starting to fall into place for our investigation, and it definitely does seem like Dennis Aston did have a whole lot of fingers and a whole lot of pies. And while we are going to want to follow up with Sheriff Morgan at the station a little bit later, for now, I actually want to head over to the hospital because of that note that we had found in Kathy's locker that led us right back to Dr. Samuel here. Because, yeah, while we have gotten a pretty clear idea about the drug trade in town, that still doesn't really fill in all the blanks about what was going on with Kathy and Emma, and why they ended up out in the woods. And it's especially disconcerting to learn that we found yet another person that had direct contact with more than likely Kathy and Emma on that fateful night. As you can expect, though, Dr. Samuel isn't very forthcoming and wants to try to misdirect us, but Matthew is not having any of that. He's had a very trying day on this 5th day. And it's all too quickly that Dr. Samuel decides to crack. And I guess to some degree, it's good news overall, I suppose. he just fully admits to the fact that he was trying to hit on Kathy and her friend at Bar Wolf that night. That's why he wrote down his number on that flyer. And our first assumption would be that the friend in question would probably be Emma, as they did, frequent the bar sometimes, but instead, we are given a different name, a name that we have not heard since, I'm wanting to say, the second day of the game. Yeah, Loretta was that rather standout figure that we saw at Kathy's funeral that I think we'd learned was also pretty much Kathy's primary friend in town that we weren't able to do a full conversation with. And as that seems like another good avenue to finally get some maybe legitimate information about Kathy, since that kind of went to the wayside, it is pretty important that we try to figure out where this Loretta is. Now, while Samuel doesn't remember a lot of that particular night, or at least he tries to paint it off that way, he does at least recall the primary thing about Loretta, in that she is the town's taco girl. Now, while my assumption would be that this is some strange sexual innuendo, or possibly a weird joke, no, instead, it does appear that, well, she is a person that sells tacos in town. Which doesn't really seem like a thriving business in my opinion, but, I mean, if you're the sole proprietor of the tacos in town, I guess you'd probably make bank. But yeah, if we need to look for her, she is going to be by a taco van somewhere in town, and I feel like I have seen that somewhere when I've been driving around the main square. So definitely something we are going to want to follow up on. But there is still the question of what we do about this information regarding Samuel and Kathy. I mean, obviously, he wants to keep it secret. It's just why should we do that for him? What has he ever really done for us? I mean, he's given us a little bit of key information, but it's information that he probably should have given to the authorities either way. And yeah, the fact that he probably was aiming to do a little bit of statutory rape would definitely look bad on him, even if he wasn't a doctor. And good old Square Matthew just laying down the law, even though he has broken so many laws during the course of the game. Still, while it would be good to turn him into the authorities, we don't really have time for that. I mean, we do finally have another lead, even though it is, on a different avenue of our investigation. Also, while we are at the hospital, we might as well go ahead and follow with Dr. James to see what he has, been up to, what he thinks about some of the current events that have transpired. And as you can expect, I do think the body would have been transported to the hospital, so that's why he so quickly learned about the suicide of Dennis. And yeah, it's a bit strange to think about the fact that the richest guy in town was, I guess, having to resort to selling drugs. I don't know if it was just to get even more money, or if it was because maybe Aston Farms wasn't as lucrative, or maybe too many failed real estate ventures. It's a bit hard to say, but James kind of thoroughly sums up just all the weird things that are going on in town just within, I would say, the last week. You've learned that there's a massive drug trade, bear attacks, kidnappings, multiple kidnappings at this point, especially if you include Isabella, shootings. Yeah, this Mizzurna Falls is a lot more violent than it leads you to think. If anything, though, it's always good to stay positive. What with Emma, being found to be still alive, we still don't know where, and I guess the assumption at this point that Dennis was the one that kidnapped her. It just kind of brings into question, why would Dennis be holding Emma prisoner? I mean, she just bought some drugs from him, but it didn't really seem like Emma, knew that Dennis was the drug kingpin. It's not like she could have, ratted him out or anything. It makes more sense to keep Isabella prisoner, because it does seem like she had a more direct correlation with the drug business going on there. But yeah, as to why Dennis would be holding Emma prisoner, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It also makes even less sense now that, whoever Dennis was commanding over, whether it would be Sandman or Bonehead, now that Dennis is dead, why would they, if they did have Emma prisoner, why would they be keeping her alive? Just a whole lot of additional questions that makes me wonder more and more how much actual, control or input Dennis had over all this criminal organization stuff going on. And even Dr. James kind of questions the fact that why would they have kept Emma prisoner just because she just bought some drugs from them? I mean, also, there's the fact that it wasn't even Emma who bought the drugs. It was Mel who, in turn, supplied them over to Kathy and Emma. So, I mean, it seems more likely they'd want to keep a lid on Mel, Dennis's son. Not keep Emma or even Kathy imprisoned. Still, while we ponder over those thoughts, it does strike me a bit that our sole real link to where Emma might be at this point is Isabella here. It is at least good news that there is an active police watch going on over her room, so not just anybody can get in. But yeah, if anything did happen to Isabella at this point, a lot of the strings in the case would probably just be left loose and unraveled. Good thing for us, though, Dr. Samuel seems to keep up his Hippocratic oath, and even though we gave him a rather stern tongue-lashing downstairs, he is more than willing to give us some information about Isabella's condition, where, while she did lose quite a bit of blood from the gunshot wound, they were able to successfully remove the bullet without hitting any major organs, so she should be fine. But as to when she might be waking up, that's still a bit up in the air. I mean, a good positive outlook would be that, she immediately wakes up right now, tells us where Emma is, and we go, storming off on our horse as a white knight and, save the day. The problem is that, with this amount of blood loss, it's difficult to make a guess. So, hopefully this deputy does his job and Isabella is A-okay. For our part, though, we are done in the hospital, so now it's time to head over to the sheriff's station for, I'll say, a little bit of melodrama. Because, as you might assume, the person that will probably be greatest affected by Dennis Aston's death is locked away in a cell down here. And true to form, it seems that Mel isn't what I would call a legitimate delinquent, a legitimate rebel. Instead, he's got a tough exterior, but he's got a warm and soft, caring inside. And whether it's just well-wishing or a legitimate knowledge of his father's mindset, he doesn't really seem to buy into the fact either that Dennis killed himself. And it's a bit difficult to say. I mean, we never really talked to Dennis Aston that much over the course of the game. At most, we just got the impression that he was a rich old curmudgeon that had a, Punch and Judy-esque relationship with his son. But we never got a really deep psychological look at him. He honestly didn't even seem that major of a character to me, but in the end, it seems he was a pretty major player in things. So whether or not he would be someone capable of suicide or someone backed in a corner that would resort to that, it's difficult to say. And yeah, I think a greater part of me is just probably thinking that Mel is hoping that his father would have taken that way out of his life. It's a nice little additional depth to Mel's character, though, learning that he does have this other side to him other than just rambunctious, armed robbery, biker. And speaking of armed robbery, a little bit of weirdness here. Sheriff Morgan apparently was just going to let Mel go, and it was Dennis who said to just keep him in the cell. I would say probably keep the guy that, committed a bit of armed robbery locked away, because it wasn't faked, or, even if it was just for insurance, that was insurance fraud, but that was definitely armed robbery, and he and an accomplice almost shot, Matthew in the face a couple times. But yeah, it all goes back to Sheriff Morgan not being a very good police officer. I understand that he's probably very exhausted, what with all the new and hip-hop happening crimes going on in town, but you don't see Matthew, well, actually you do see Matthew sleeping constantly, but that's only to pass time. That's not out of exhaustion. Sheriff Morgan, though, does have a rather good point here, and that's the fact that running around like a headless chicken is not going to get anything done. At this point, it's more or less just a matter of time. It's a matter of waiting for Isabella to wake up. It's a matter of letting the deputies, search through town. It could very well be that, yes, Bonehead or Sandman, now that we know that Sandman has escaped from the sheriff's station's, I guess APB. Yeah, those two guys seem like pretty prime suspects right now, but we have no idea where they could be. And even though this is a small town, it just takes time to search. It's just that at this point, time is a very precious commodity that we don't have a whole lot of. Yeah, Sheriff Morgan, at least for his credit, decides to try to reiterate his thought process with what's going on. There was, Christmas Eve, Kathy and Emma go out to the forest, they get attacked by bears, Kathy's knocked down, Emma runs. There's the drug connection that, Mel had. Mel, Bonehead to Isabella. Whether or not Mel was informed by his dad or knew that his dad was actively dealing in drugs, I would say no, because if that was the case, wouldn't you just go directly to the source to try to secure drugs? Or, I don't know, maybe he thought Dennis would not have been super happy that his kid was trying to get into the items that he was selling. But it also doesn't make a lot of sense that if Dennis did know, that he would inadvertently spill the beans about the Isabella bonehead connection. I mean, there was a number of times that Mel seemed probably below average intelligence, but I don't think he would just inadvertently blurt out that important information. Yeah, it still seems like even if Dennis had control over the drug trade, that I can't see why he would have any interest in Emma or Kathy. Because, I mean, even Mel didn't have any idea of that connection between, his father and the drugs and Bonehead. For now, though, we don't really have anything else to do until lunchtime. And as the diner has been pretty much a bust all of this time, I think I should go south of the border for my, lunchtime cuisine. And wouldn't you know it, just right across the street from Captain Naz's place and also our backyard shed abode is the One Town Taco Van. Yeah, it's probably just somebody normally playing this and driving around the town, probably exploring, the main square here. It probably would seem extremely stand-outish that there would just be this miscellaneous van here that says tacos. Maybe it would be advertising for a nearby taco business, but instead it's just a taco truck, which I would not have thought would be very prevalent in a 2,000 person population Colorado town in the early 2000s, but well, there you go, just a taco van. And Loretta here, to her credit, she does know Kathy, but she seems a bit tight-lipped on that subject. Matthew, though, being the hard-nosed detective that he is, smells a lead here somewhere, so he keeps on pressing the matter. And he does get the feeling, at least from what we learned over the course of the game, that much like Emma, Kathy did have a side that maybe not everybody got to see. Just if you recall back to Kathy's funeral, there was something that was kind of bothering Loretta even there. And it seems to also go here even to her workplace at the taco van. And namely, that seems to be Father Barton. Now, as to why Father Barton is such a massive bother to her, she is not willing to discuss that right now. She uses the excuse that she is working hard, peddling all the al pastor tacos to the people passing by. But she is at least willing to meet with us later to, have a little discussion on Kathy. And that does work out for me, because, well, I'm actually not especially in the mood for tacos from the taco van. I do have to question a bit, though, about this idea that Father Barton is lurking somewhere around the big, wide-open, empty streets here, but, sometimes paranoia is justified. Which is kind of why I'm a bit paranoid, and I want to go follow up back at the sheriff's station, cause, unexpectedly, Wolf has shown up here, I guess, to talk to Sheriff Morgan. it seems that instead of Sheriff Morgan having called in Wolf has managed to volunteer some information and come in of his own volition. And it seems that he was filling in Sheriff Morgan about the relationship that, I guess, he and Isabella have that we already kind of learned having broken into her apartment beforehand. Namely the fact that, Isabella's husband was Wolf's older brother. He had died, and as an act of charity, Wolf had offered Isabella a job here in town and a little bit of safety and security. Not only that, he managed to get Dennis to agree to rent her a room at the apartment building, which I think Dennis was probably against because it was a pretty crummy, almost condemned building. But out of nowhere, Dennis suddenly had a change of heart. Not only was he willing to allow her to live there, but he was allowing her to live there completely rent-free. And that was because there was an additional job that she was doing for Dennis. Namely one that we had kind of overheard while we were at that lakeside Aston apartment or cabin. And that was the fact that Isabella was actively working in the drug trade, trying to lure in people with the promise of a hallucinogenic high with the epoch. And while she would reel people in, Bonehead would be there to actually sell them the drugs and get the transaction in place. And yeah, I guess Dennis was the one who had hired both Bonehead and probably Sandman at this point, so I don't know, maybe it was Dennis who was controlling everything. Still, Matthew isn't especially happy with the fact that Wolf was very knowing about all this going on in the background, and that Wolf was seemingly more than happy to go along with it, just because Isabella's singing was also bringing in customers pretty much every night to his bar. And I kind of agree, that's kind of a shitty reason to allow someone to be pretty much a drug prostitute. Especially since we know full well that Isabella was not happy at all and that she felt so unhappy and imprisoned. But there's no law about being selfish, though there's probably a law about being an accomplice to the drug trade here. I don't know. Well, Wolf seems like he could be held accountable, but there's honestly nothing concrete there. It also doesn't help that Wolf, like I said, volunteered this information and came forward, so it does make him seem less guilty, so there's not really anything we can do on that end. And in fact, that's pretty much all we need to do for the afternoon. The next thing we need to do is not till later on in the evening, so figured this might be as good an opportunity as any to head on back to the homestead and take a very long extended afternoon nap because this has been a very tough day. So hopefully you'll join me next time as we head into the evening of Night 5. See you then.